That's useful as well. Thanks so much, Mike. And I was so delighted to get invited to this conference. I was here 3 or 4 years ago and you guys blew me away. I thought it was the most incredible community of doers and collaborators. Just to demonstrate that right now, could everyone stand up together? And just have a little bit of a wiggle while you're there because my back gets really sore listening to these presentations. And now you can sit down. Have a look at how well you guys just collaborated together. So when you're arguing about EPA regulation, battery fires, just like channel that. The collaboration in this room is radical. But I've been working a lot on not saying yes to every opportunity because anyone that knows me knows that I tend to overcommit. So when Thomas called me, I took my deep breath. I said, I'm not going to say yes straight away, even though I so want to be there. I asked one key question, and that key question was, what is the theme of the conference dinner this year, Thomas? And you can see I said yes instantly when he told me the theme. And I'm actually here, my keynote is partially really good informed conversation and information about circular economy, but it's also launching my campaign to vote Jodie for Best Dressed tonight. I am wearing vintage 80s and I was yesterday. So the campaign started yesterday for anyone that spoke to me yesterday, and I've spent a ridiculous amount of time making every slide 80s themed in this presentation. So I just want you all to take that into account, whoever the powers that be. And can I get anyone that's ever won Best Dressed at this conference to stand up? Garth, I know you, Anne. Oh, so you people are like my nemesis, and I know I can't compete with you one-on-one because you're mad here. So this is why I've had to be really creative. But it is a lesson on how to influence, you know, when you can't get in the door, you go in the window, and that's kind of what you have to do a lot in circular economy. So my name's Jodie Bricout. This is a picture of me in 1983. So I was actually around in the 80s on shag pile carpet, which is pretty cool. I'm from Adelaide, and Joe Pickens said yesterday that that makes me special, so I'm leaning into the South Australia special aspect. And I've had a pretty big adventure to go from Festy Feral on shag pile in regional Australia to someone that I'm pretty proud of how much influence I get to have at a big scale now on mainstream infrastructure in Australia. A lot of this story, my origin story, has actually gone through France. So I worked for 13 years in France. I moved there as a young graduate, stupid young graduate in love. So there was no logic in that with very poor French skills, but it was a very good learning curve. This is the site that I worked on in France, so it's not the glamour that we usually think about in France. This is not an 80s photo. I couldn't find one from the 80s. This is from the late 60s. But that big piece of kit in the front of the photo is the modern coal mine that went into place at this site in Lossongoel in the late 60s, and that was actually closed in 1986. So in the 80s, the site did still look like this, a working, functioning coal mine with hundreds of amazing workers going down in that mine every day, some days not coming back up. So it was an amazing place to work. And when we're talking about transforming infrastructure, this is what I think of, because I worked at the most amazing place where they transformed this, which after closing could have become a real blight and a real embarrassment. You know, anytime we were working with anyone in the UK, they were like, how have you not scrapped those slag heaps there? We're really embarrassed of them. We like roll it all over and start again. But this site was actually turned into, this is what it looked like when I left. It's a hub for eco-activities, so I worked for a not-for-profit supported by government and industry to actually shift the economic structure of their region, to build circular supply chains, to have building materials that are made from recycled material, to develop their own solar panels and things like this, and to pilot them and really get them going across. So it was very much an economic challenge and an environmental challenge, and it ended up being an amazing place to work. But when I started there, I actually thought my boss was completely bonkers and that I would not see any of that change. So it's pretty inspiring to have been able to work on that in person and also worked with some of Europe's best and finest, different jurisdictions, different companies. I came back to Adelaide, because it's rad, in 2016, and I was more than bitten by the circular economy bug by then. I thought I'd just go back and get a regular job. But I managed to get the gig to write Green Industries report on quantifying the benefits of a circular economy in South Australia that was, a bit behind by European times at the time, but so ahead of everything that we've been talking about, and it's a really great piece of work. I now work for the past 3 years at a company called Aurecon. So this is mainstream engineering people. So we have over 7,000 employees, stacks of engineers. So I've come back to my people, building the biggest infrastructure we've got across Australia, New Zealand, Asia. So I get to sit behind influencing these people on circular economy. We service directly, councils like you, governments, etc., on circular economy roadmaps and things. But we are also in there advocating every day to get circular economy on all of these mainstream projects as well. And Bill Cox, the current CEO on the left, had a really big part to play in employing me to develop this team because he sees that as the future of engineering. And I wanted to just give a little shout out to Louise Adams, who is our new CEO, incoming CEO. And I think the fact that we've got a woman CEO of a tier 1 engineering firm in Australia is amazing. And she's from regional South Australia, so that makes her special. So we all know that construction matters. 7% of our economy, now it's not working. I thought I was doing really well so far. It is jobs and growth, jobs and growth, jobs and growth land, and we all know that. It is also a heck of a lot of waste that is produced every year. It's more than a third of the total waste produced in Australia, and it's going up. We have a huge spend in this area, and that spend is going up even faster than the generation. So there's a lot of money going into this area, which makes it much easier for me to go in and talk to big mainstream about why they need to be doing better and preventing that waste from happening in the first place. The massive good news story, of course, is that over 80% of construction waste is already recycled. We'd love to see it maybe going to higher value, but it is a fabulous good news story that everyone here in this room and the whole industry can applaud, and Ainsley's had a big part to play in that as well. But the stuff that's still going to landfill represents more than a quarter of all of our waste going to landfill. So it's still such a massive challenge. When that's just talking about the output side, what about the input side to all the buildings and built environment infrastructure that we're building every year? So there's more than 300 million tonnes of materials going into our infrastructure in Australia every year. And that represents, just for non-metallic materials, 42% of all material consumption in Australia. So we need to be thinking about how we get all those inputs into our construction industries as well. But the really exciting thing I find is that more than 80% of instruction inputs are domestic. So those challenges around packaging, textiles, electronics, where we have Buckley's charts, we are doing better to influencing the supply chains on these, but we're really dependent on Europe and the way they're shifting these global supply chains, with a tail wagging the dog trying to change those supply chains. But construction, we can actually do stuff here and build proper circular supply chains, that we have the material here, we have that demand with all the materials that we're using locally, but we have that really important bit in the middle where we can work with industry on great circular supply chains. The material use question is huge for me. So globally, over the past 50 years, we have tripled material consumption, and that is showing no signs of decreasing. Most of that material consumption is non-renewable materials as well. So, I know we're used to talking about the waste challenges, but this is an absolute source challenge as well globally. And in the past 5 years, we've consumed more than a quarter of the material that humanity has consumed since 1900. We are a very hungry global economy. And it's a real economic challenge as well, because productivity, so the bang for the buck that we get, how much money are we actually creating in economic value out of every kilogram or tonne of material that we're digging up and moving around? And that's hardly increased since 1970. You can see that the labour productivity and the greenhouse gas productivity has really ramped up, but we're really hardly improved. See that? Good, huh? Vote for Jodie. What's worse is that Australia's really lagging behind in this area. We have the 4th lowest material productivity in the OECD, and the amount of value that we create out of every kilogram material is less than half of the OECD's benchmark. So we've got a long way to go in this area. Needless to say, we are not very circular. I'm surprised that this number hasn't been mentioned in the conference yet, so I was expecting to have to delete this slide, but recent CSIRO research has put Australia's circularity number at 3.7%. It goes up slightly when you don't include resource mining waste, which they don't include in other countries' figures, which sounds, pretty shit. It's about half as good as the rest of the world, which is, pretty shit. But just to put it in context as well, everyone thinks we should be getting to 100, and CSIRO think that the theoretical maximum with the way that this is calculated is around 30%. These numbers are really interesting to put in a pitch deck to kind of get people thinking about things, but it's really important to unpack them all to understand what we can actually do in terms of implementation around these numbers. And in fact, those numbers just represent how much, in terms of outflow from an economy, so all the waste that's coming out, how much of that is going to circular pathways versus linear pathways, and also of all the materials coming into the economy, how much of them come from circular or linear pathways, right? So it's not looking at all the most important part of the circular economy, which is how do we keep the stuff that is in the economy as stuff, as useful infrastructure, as buildings, as components, and not getting it back to that waste area. So this leads me to think a lot about time, because there's the kind of the flow of material through our infrastructure, but when we are building stuff, we're wanting these things to last. So some of our strategies that we use are about using less materials in the first place, about using things for longer, and then only after that getting materials back. And using those materials again in the economy. And some of those things are around reusing existing materials or refurbishing existing assets, and then some of them are about building new things that are actually made to adapt or be there a long time. So let's talk about progress. An amazing example of this is a company called X-Frame. They're an Australian-New Zealand company, and this ANZ Bank is in Lismore, and there's people here from Lismore that go to this bank that didn't know this story, which is really, really cool. So they're basically a modular, completely disassemblable system for interior fit-outs. So the next time, and they're used in ANZ banks across the country, so the next time they need to refit the bank, they just take everything apart, they order a few new parts, put it back together, change the outside. So it's actually preventing future waste by design. In Lismore, that bank is uninsurable because it's been underwater multiple times. So what they did is build it out of marine-grade plywood. So next time, God forbid, if that goes under again, they just take it apart, put the fans on, dry it, put everything back together, and they will be up and running so much faster than every other piece of kit in Lismore. And anyone here that's had to deal with emergency waste management, you will be very thankful for more buildings like that. There's amazing stuff happening in mass-engineered timber that can be designed for disassembly, extraordinarily few amount of waste produced in those kind of buildings. Build to rent is a really interesting aspect that's very exciting. Millions and millions and millions of dollars are going into this at the moment, and it enables long-term thinking in the housing market. We all know there are stacks and stacks and stacks of challenges, and this is how I feel every day, like challenge, 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 and we're all trying to pick them apart, and that's really important to recognise, and there's been a lot of that here. I'm just wondering what I skip over, Mike. I wanted to make the point that our infrastructure is changing. There's a lot of talk about the challenges around recycling with renewable technology. It is incredibly important, and I've been a big advocate of developing new recycling systems for solar and stuff like that. But over the past 12 months, I've really realised that my speaking out of this is actually sometimes used by anti-renewables lobbying to slow down the process of getting renewables up and running. And it's really important to remember that no energy is free from material use. Coal uses so much material and makes so much waste. Nuclear would be the same as well. So while we need to advocate for circular Renewables, please remember, don't let us be used as an industry to slow down that renewable transition. Thinking I might just stop there, Mike, because I know that how can I warm up for Dirt Girl and Costa? That's really tough. But I did want to challenge everyone at the end of this presentation to think about what they're doing personally to help this infrastructure shift, and I would love to talk to all of you about it because I've got heaps more to say. But we'll talk about it over lunch, yeah? Thanks, everyone. And vote for Jodie.